You know, so many shows are going off the air since you've been on.
That's true.
So I'm going to suggest the audience give...
There was a time when getting invited to the Ed Sullivan Show meant you had truly made it. One performance could turn an unknown act into a national name. But behind the applause and live broadcasts, there were also moments that ended careers on that stage just as quickly as they began. In this video, we look at the performers who crossed a line, challenged the rules, or simply had one moment that changed everything. Some were rising stars, some were already legends, but all of them learned the same lesson in very different ways. Join us as we uncover what really happened when the spotlight turned into a final appearance. Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker was already a global star long before she ever appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. But her path to that moment explains why her appearance stood out so much in American television history. In the United States, Baker first became known in the 1920s. She was part of the Harlem Renaissance scene, and she quickly gained attention for her stage presence, dance style, and fearless performances. However, American audiences at the time were also deeply divided about what they saw. Her style was expressive, bold, and often far outside what mainstream American entertainment considered acceptable. Some critics focused more on her costume choices and movement style than on her talent. Because of this, she faced limited opportunities in the US and eventually moved to Europe, where she found a very different kind of acceptance. In France, Baker became a major star. She performed in Paris cabarets and became one of the most recognizable entertainers in Europe. Her shows were more openly celebrated there, and she was treated as a major cultural figure rather than a controversial performer. Over time, she also became known for her humanitarian work and her involvement in the French resistance during World War II. By the time she returned to the United States for performances, she was no longer just seen as an entertainer, but also as a global personality with a complex public image. When Baker returned to American television later in her career, she stepped into a media environment that was still very strict about how performers should appear on screen. American television in the early 1960s had clear expectations about clean presentation. This was especially true on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was known for carefully controlling what could be shown to a national audience. Performers were expected to follow rules about costumes, language, movement, and overall presentation. Sullivan wanted acts to feel safe, polished, and acceptable for family viewing. For Black and international performers, these standards were often even more tightly enforced. There was an unspoken pressure to avoid anything that might be seen as too provocative, too political, or too culturally unfamiliar for mainstream American television audiences. This meant that many artists had to adjust their performances before stepping onto the stage. When Josephine Baker appeared on the show in 1963, she was presented in a way that was noticeably different from her famous Paris performances. Reports and historical accounts suggest that her costume and stage presentation were toned down for television. Instead of the more theatrical and daring style she was known for in Europe, she appeared in a more controlled and restrained format. Her movements and presentation were shaped to fit the expectations of American broadcast standards. Behind the scenes, there was also tension about how much of her original performance style could be included. Baker was a performer with a very strong identity on stage. Her art depended on expression, rhythm, and personality. However, television producers were focused on timing, framing, and avoiding anything that might trigger complaints from viewers or sponsors. This created a quiet negotiation over what would be allowed and what would be cut or softened. Even though she was already internationally respected, Baker was not treated like a regular guest performer on the show. Her appearance was framed more as a special cultural moment rather than the beginning of an ongoing television presence. She did not become a recurring guest, and her performance stood more as a one-time feature than a long-term booking. This reflected how television at the time often handled artists who did not fully match its preferred format. They could be invited, showcased, and even celebrated, but still not fully integrated into the regular lineup. But Josephine Baker was only the beginning, and the next performer would challenge Sullivan's rules in a way that caused immediate backlash. Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason's rise in stand-up comedy in the early 1960s came at a time when television was still very strict about tone, language, and behavior. His style was different from many other comedians of the period. He used fast timing, personal observations, and a strong stage presence that sometimes felt unpredictable to live audiences. That energy helped him get noticed, and it eventually led to an invitation to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the most important stages for any entertainer at the time. For many performers, appearing on Sullivan's program meant national recognition. It was a chance to reach millions of viewers in one night. Mason's 1964 appearance was supposed to be another step forward in his career. Instead, it became one of the most talked about and controversial moments in the show's history. During his performance, Mason began delivering his usual stand-up material in front of a live audience and a national television crowd. At first, everything seemed normal. The audience reacted with laughter, and the rhythm of his set was flowing as expected. But near the end of his routine, Mason made a comment that would change everything. The exact wording has been debated over time, but it involved a gesture and a remark that Sullivan interpreted as an intentional insult directed at him. According to accounts from the event, Mason referenced 2 fingers in his joke while gesturing with his hand. In British and American body language, that gesture can sometimes be interpreted in different ways depending on context. Sullivan, watching from the stage and backstage monitors, believed Mason was directing a rude or disrespectful gesture toward him personally. Whether this was actually Mason's intent remains unclear, but Sullivan reacted immediately and strongly. From the audience's perspective, the moment was confusing. Many people in the studio audience did not fully understand what had triggered the tension. They were laughing just seconds earlier, and suddenly there was a noticeable shift in energy. Mason himself seemed unsure in the moment why the reaction had changed so quickly. There was no clear explanation given to the audience during the broadcast. Backstage, Ed Sullivan's reaction was fast and decisive. He was known for tightly controlling his show, especially when it came to live performances. Sullivan valued order, respect, and predictability on stage. When he believed a performer had crossed a line, he did not wait to review or reconsider during the broadcast. Instead, he would act immediately to protect the tone of the program. On air, Sullivan signaled that Mason's performance should be cut short. The show's production team followed his direction, and Mason's routine was abruptly ended before it could fully conclude. The transition was sudden, and viewers at home could sense that something had gone wrong, even though no detailed explanation was given during the broadcast. The aftermath was immediate. Mason was not invited back to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show again. In television industry terms, this was not always announced as a formal ban, but it functioned like one. Being removed from Sullivan's guest list effectively meant losing access to one of the most powerful platforms in entertainment at the time. Without that stage, many performers struggled to maintain the same level of national exposure. Mason later tried to explain what had happened. He insisted that his joke was misunderstood and that he did not intend to insult Sullivan. He argued that his gesture and words were part of his comedic delivery and not directed personally at the host. However, the explanation did not change the outcome. In Sullivan's view, the moment had already damaged the trust required for live television performance. Sullivan's approach to comedy was shaped by his belief that television needed clear boundaries. He saw stand-up as something that had to be controlled carefully to to avoid surprise moments that could upset viewers or sponsors. When a comedian improvised or delivered material that could be interpreted in multiple ways, Sullivan often viewed it as a risk. In his mind, unpredictability was not part of a successful broadcast. It represented a loss of control, and that was something he worked hard to prevent on his show. And just as one comedian learned how fast things could fall apart on Sullivan's stage, a rock band was about to push those limits even further. The Rolling Stones. When the Rolling Stones were first invited to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, they were still early in their rise in the United States. They had already built a strong reputation in the United Kingdom as one of the most exciting new rock bands. Their sound, image, and stage energy stood out in a way that felt very different from many of the cleaner pop acts that were common on American television at the time. For Ed Sullivan, the band represented both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, having a rising British rock group on the show helped keep the program connected to younger audiences. On the other hand, the Rolling Stones had a reputation for songs with direct, suggestive, and rebellious themes. That meant their material needed to be carefully reviewed before going on air. The main issue came with their song, "Let's Spend the Night Together." The title alone was already considered too suggestive for American broadcast television standards in the 1960s. Sullivan and his production team made a clear request. The band would need to change the lyric to something more acceptable for family television. This was not unusual for the show. Performers were often asked to adjust wording or tone to match broadcast guidelines. The Stones faced a decision. They could refuse and lose the appearance, or they could agree to a compromise that would allow them to perform on one of the most widely watched television programs in the country. They chose the second option, but they did not fully abandon the original spirit of the song. On the night of the performance, Mick Jagger stepped onto the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show and delivered a modified version of the lyric. Instead of singing, "Let's spend the night together," he exaggerated the change to, "Let's spend some time together." The way he delivered it made it clear that the alteration was not coming from the band's natural performance style, but from an outside requirement. His tone and facial expression made the compromise feel obvious to the audience. At the same time, cameras captured Ed Sullivan's reaction. He appeared visibly dissatisfied with how the change was handled. While the show did not openly interrupt the performance, Sullivan's expression and body language suggested that he was not pleased with the direction the band had taken. He was known for valuing control and consistency in live television, and this moment showed the tension between his expectations and the band's approach. The audience reaction in the studio was mixed. Some viewers responded with surprise, especially those who were familiar with the original lyrics. Others found the moment humorous, reacting to the obvious adjustment in the wording. Younger audience members seemed more focused on the energy of the performance itself rather than the specific lyric change. The combination of reactions created a sense of unpredictability in the studio that was not typical for the show. This performance highlighted a larger tension between British rock culture and American television standards in the 1960s. The Rolling Stones represented a new kind of musical identity that was more direct and less filtered than many of the acts traditionally featured on American variety programs. Meanwhile, television producers like Sullivan were responsible for maintaining a level of content control that matched sponsor expectations and national broadcast guidelines. Even though the band was not banned after the appearance, the relationship between them and the show changed. They were not removed from the industry, but they also were not treated as repeat guests in the same way as more conventional performers. The compromise they made during the performance was seen as functional, but not entirely comfortable for either side. It created a sense that future appearances would require even more negotiation or might not happen at all. And just when it seemed like rock music had pushed Sullivan's rules as far as they could go, another band would break them in a way that could not be ignored. The Doors. By the late 1960s, The Doors had quickly become one of the most talked-about rock bands in the United States. Their sound was different from many groups on the radio at the time, and their stage presence drew strong attention wherever they performed. With Jim Morrison as the lead singer, the band developed a reputation for being intense, unpredictable, and very direct in how they presented their music. As their popularity grew, they were invited to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show. At the time, this was a major step for any musical act. The show was one of the most widely watched programs in America, and it often helped artists reach a much larger national audience in a single appearance. For The Doors, it was a chance to bring their rising fame into the mainstream television space. However, the invitation came with conditions. Television in that era followed strict rules about language and content, especially on a program like Sullivan's. Producers reviewed songs carefully before live broadcasts. For The Doors, the focus quickly became one specific line in their hit song, "Light My Fire." The lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," was seen as a problem. It was considered too suggestive for American television standards, and the production team asked the band to change it. The request was straightforward. They were allowed to perform the song, but that one line needed to be adjusted to something less controversial. This type of request was not unusual for the show. Many artists had been asked to modify lyrics before going on air. The expectation was that performers would agree, so the broadcast could stay within acceptable limits. At first, there was some discussion about the change. The Doors were aware of the opportunity the show represented, but they were also known for wanting to keep their music unchanged. Jim Morrison, in particular, had a strong sense of artistic control. For him, lyrics were not something to be adjusted for convenience. They were part of the identity of the song. On the night of the performance, the band took the stage at the Ed Sullivan Show in front of a national audience. Everything began normally. The music started, the performance moved forward, and the energy in the studio was steady. Viewers watching at home saw a rising rock band delivering one of their most popular songs. But when the moment came for the disputed lyric, Jim Morrison made a clear decision. Instead of changing the line as requested, he sang the original words, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." It was a brief moment, but it immediately changed the tone of the performance behind the scenes. In the control area and backstage, production staff reacted quickly. The discomfort was visible. The show had been careful in preparing for the performance, and the expectation had been that the agreed change would be followed. Morrison's decision broke that agreement in real time during a live broadcast where nothing could be edited or stopped. From the audience perspective, the reaction was mixed. Many viewers may not have fully understood the significance of the lyric change, but people familiar with the request or the controversy recognized what had happened. There was a sense of surprise in the room, even if it was not fully explained on air. The band continued the performance without stopping, maintaining their focus until the song ended. After the broadcast, the situation became clearer within the television industry. Reports from the time indicate that the Doors were told they would not be invited back to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show again. Like other similar cases, this was not always announced publicly as a formal ban, but it effectively meant the end of their appearances on the program. What makes this moment especially notable is the contrast between the Doors' public image and the structure of the show itself. The band was seen as part of a new wave of rock music that pushed boundaries and challenged expectations. Their performances were often described as intense and emotionally direct. In contrast, Sullivan's program was built around careful planning, controlled presentation, and strict attention to broadcast rules. When those two approaches met, the result was a conflict over control. The production team expected compliance with agreed changes. The band chose to prioritize the original form of their song. Neither side fully adjusted to the other, and the live setting left no room to correct the outcome once it happened. Despite the backstage tension, the performance itself became one of the most remembered moments in the history of the show. It is often discussed not only because of the song, but also because of what it represented. A rising rock band, a strict television format, and a live decision that could not be reversed all came together in a single broadcast. And while the Doors pushed past the rules in real time, the next performer would show how television controlled even the biggest stars before they ever reached the stage. Elvis Presley. Before the Doors, the Rolling Stones, and other rock acts tested the limits of television, Elvis Presley was already at the center of a major debate about what could and could not be shown on American TV. His rise in the mid-1950s brought a new style of performance that many people had never seen before. It was energetic, physical, and very different from the polished performers who usually appeared on programs like The Ed Sullivan Show. Elvis Presley's early reputation was mixed. To many young fans, he was exciting and new. But to many adults and television producers, his stage movements and style of performance felt controversial. He did not just stand and sing, he moved in ways that drew attention, especially with his hips and lower body. This created concern for television networks that were focused on maintaining a safe viewing experience for families watching at home. Because of this, there was initial hesitation from the production team of The Ed Sullivan Show when it came to fully featuring him. The show was one of the most important stages in American entertainment, and booking Elvis was both a risk and an opportunity. On one hand, he was extremely popular and could bring in huge ratings. On the other hand, there was uncertainty about how his performance would be received by a national audience. When Elvis finally did appear on the show, careful decisions were made about how he would be filmed. One of the most important choices involved camera framing. Instead of showing his full body during performance, the cameras were often positioned to focus mainly on his upper body. This was done to limit the visibility of his hip movements, which had already become a major point of discussion in the media. This decision was not accidental. It was a strategic compromise between allowing Elvis to perform naturally and maintaining the broadcast standards of the time. He was still able to sing and move, but the way the audience experienced the performance was controlled through camera angles. This created a version of Elvis that was slightly different from what live audiences saw at concerts. Even with these restrictions, the performance still made a strong impression. The public reaction was divided in some ways, but overall, it drew huge attention. Some viewers were surprised by how toned down the television version felt compared to reports of his live shows. Others appreciated that they were finally able to see him on national television at all. For many young viewers, it was the first time they had seen Elvis perform. The difference between his live concert reputation and his television appearance became an important point of discussion. On stage, Elvis was known for being more physically expressive. On television, especially on The Ed Sullivan Show, that energy was carefully controlled through production choices. This created two versions of the same performer in the public mind, one from live shows and one from television. Ed Sullivan himself also went through a change in how he viewed Elvis. At first, there was skepticism about whether Elvis would fit into the show's format. His style did not match the traditional variety acts that Sullivan usually featured. However, after the appearance generated extremely high ratings and strong audience response, Sullivan's position shifted. He moved from hesitation to full endorsement of Elvis as a guest performer. This shift was important because it showed that commercial success could influence how strict the rules were. Even though Elvis's performance had been carefully controlled, it still proved highly successful for the show. That success made it easier for Sullivan and his team to accept him as part of the program's lineup. Elvis was never banned from the show, but he was heavily shaped by it. Instead of being excluded, he was adjusted to fit within broadcast expectations. This meant changes in how he was filmed, how he was presented, and how his performance was framed for television audiences. The goal was not to remove him, but to make him acceptable for a wide national audience. This approach had a long-term effect on how television handled major performers. Rather than simply rejecting artists who were seen as controversial, shows like The Ed Sullivan Show often chose to modify how they were presented. This allowed popular performers to reach audiences while still staying within broadcast limits. In the end, Elvis's early television appearances show how control and popularity work together. He was not removed from the platform. Instead, his image was carefully adjusted so that he could exist within it. That balance between expression and restriction would later become a major theme for many performers who followed him. And while Elvis was carefully shaped for television success, one folk singer would soon refuse to be shaped at all. Bob Dylan. By the early 1960s, Bob Dylan had become one of the most important new voices in American folk music. He was not just known for singing songs, but for writing lyrics that spoke directly about politics, society, and everyday life. His songs often carried strong opinions, especially about issues like war, civil rights, and political groups. This made him both highly respected and closely watched in the music world. As his popularity grew, Dylan was invited to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show. For many artists, this invitation was a major opportunity. The show reached millions of viewers across the United States, and it was known for helping performers reach a national audience very quickly. For Dylan, it was a chance to bring his folk music into one of the most influential television spaces in the country. However, not all of Dylan's material fit comfortably within television broadcast standards at the time. One song in particular became a problem: Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues. The song was a political satire that made fun of anti-communist paranoia and the John Birch Society, a conservative political group. The lyrics used humor and criticism to make their point, but the subject matter was considered sensitive for national television. When CBS reviewed Dylan's planned performance, they raised concerns about the song. The network felt that the lyrics were too politically charged and could lead to complaints or controversy if broadcast as written. Because of this, they made a request to Dylan and his team. He was asked either to change the lyrics or choose a different song for the appearance. This kind of request was not unusual for The Ed Sullivan Show. The program often worked closely with performers to ensure that content matched broadcast standards. Many artists agreed to small changes in order to appear on the show. However, Dylan responded differently. Bob Dylan refused to alter the lyrics of his song. For him, the meaning of the song was directly tied to its original words. Changing them would have changed the message he intended to share. He believed that the song should be performed exactly as written, without adjustments for television approval. Because of this disagreement, reports from the time suggest that Dylan chose not to go through with the performance. Instead of appearing on stage and performing a different song, he left the situation before the scheduled broadcast. Accounts describe a backstage walkout, where Dylan stepped away rather than compromise on the requested changes. This decision immediately changed what was supposed to be a major television appearance. Instead of a live performance, there was no appearance at all. From the production side, this was a serious issue. The show had planned time, promotion, and scheduling around his performance. His absence left a noticeable gap in the lineup. Ed Sullivan's reaction to situations like this was typically firm. He valued performers who followed agreed-upon guidelines and worked within the structure of the show. When artists refused to comply with content requests, It often resulted in them not being invited back. Sullivan's program depended on careful planning and control, so unpredictability was something he tried to avoid. In Dylan's case, the response followed a similar pattern. While there was no dramatic public confrontation on air, the outcome was clear. He did not appear, and he was not featured on the program afterward. In practical terms, this meant that his opportunity to reach that television audience through the show ended before it began. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden side of classic TV history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories like this.